Welcome to the latest episode of the Leadership Club. And today I have great pleasure in interviewing Cédric Picaud. Cédric has been involved in the logistics business since 1996 when he started his own company. And since then he's worked for several large multinationals. So Cédric, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, sure. As you mentioned, I started my career by creating my own transportation company, and it was a long time ago, in 1996. Then I spent most of my career with large multinational companies located in several countries and focusing on clinical trials and healthcare. So I spent most of the past 15 years in healthcare and clinical trials. And since 2015, I'm leading CRYOPDP, which is one of the top leaders in clinical trial logistics and niche therapies logistics, such as cell and gene therapies, for example.
Looking at the COVID-19 crisis, what do you see will be the biggest challenge that you will face when we start back to what we call the new normal?
I think there will be two challenges. The first one will most probably be the main one. It will be about maintaining what has been learned during this period. So everything that we have deployed during the COVID-19 crisis, it's about making sure that we can maintain these good habits and this culture that we have been creating and not be back to the pre-crisis situation. So I think that will be the first challenge. The second challenge that I see will be to adapt ourselves to this new normal model, as you call. And it will be a different model, but it can also be short-term wise or long-term wise, maybe an exposure to new type of crisis as well. So as you must probably know, we speak a lot about the U-shape or the V-shape or the L-shape scenarios of restart. So I think the challenge is to be ready, to be agile, and to be able to face and to cope with this scenario of restart. But in the meantime, I think one of the challenge will be to be able to also face potential new crises, short-term wise or long-term wise. So I think it's not about only about what we call business continuity plans. It's much more than that. It's being able in the future to scale our production and our services capabilities to the demand, which can be higher or lower than our capabilities. I think it's also being able to adapt our working modes. And for example, we had, most of us, in the past few weeks and months, to shift to work from home mode, involving hundreds of thousands of people overnight. So we have to be able to be in such a situation in the future. And I think it's about to be enough agile to somehow tailor-made our working processes to the specific constraints. So I will summarize these two challenges in this way. The first one being to maintain what we have learned, and the second one to adapt to the new situation.
Can I just ask you sort of like a supplementary question on there? Mm-hmm. You mentioned the working from home more, but what is going to be the effect on the actual bricks and mortar that businesses have if we're all working from home? Do you see us downsizing? Do you, because we're going to eventually end up with surplus real estate. What's going to happen to that? Do you have any views or any thoughts about that direction?
Yeah, I think, working from home is a nice concept, but it only can apply to a certain type of people. So in our company, like in all the companies, it will be a small part of people which will be involved in that kind of new way of working. So the impact on the day-to-day will be relative, because we will still need to have people on our production sites, on our customer service centers, where the day-to-day on these facilities is really essential. So it will be a kind of transformation, but we have to take that in a relative way because, of course, it will still be necessary to have a large part of our employees physically present into service center and production centers.
What will be the actions you are working on new behavior and consequential work climate to your company? For example, in terms of people management and the relationship with customers.
So I would like to develop a bit what we have learned during the crisis. Maybe just before that, we need to remind that this crisis was just terrible. There was more than 6 million people infected by the virus and above 350,000 deaths. So that's just terrible. In parallel of that, in parallel of all these terrible aspects, for a pure business point of view, we did our best to recognize somehow a few positive lessons that we have learned during this crisis. And I would like to mention a few ones. The first one, of course, was the fact that we were able to work from home, to work remotely. It was good for safety in this specific context, but as we know, it had also some positive impact on the environment. Second aspect is that we have been able to shorten hierarchical lines and somehow to share leadership within the organization, so that was very positive. Third point, we have seen a lot of solidarities between employees and within management functions, and it was facilitating a lot of business decisions, and I think it was very positive as well. Other point, somehow I have seen that we have been able to develop a kind of collective intelligence, working all together. And all these aspects that I just mentioned are very positive aspects that now we need to maintain and to install in terms of durability. Now, more concretely, specifically on the point of working from home, of course, as you know, it's only for certain jobs that it's possible to work from home. It's positive, but it requires a very specific management approach and somehow a much more rigorous approach and efforts to keep the social link. The consequence for us is that there are less trips, and this is a practice for certain jobs that we will maintain. For instance, every internal meetings will be held remotely in the future. That was already a bit the case, but now that will be more systematically. And why are we doing that? We are doing that because it's much more efficient. It's much better for the environment impact as well. And somehow in this crisis context, we have to admit that it's also financially efficient. Now on the second part of your question, what does it mean for customers? I think there was some positive effect for customers out of these lessons that we have learned from the crisis. For instance, we are able to reply much faster to customers now to specific complex requests, which that we have seen during this crisis time. We are able to take decisions more rapidly, and this was the case in this crisis context, but this is now the case as a standard practice, let's say, or as a new practice. We were able to have a much better and efficient organization because of this specific context of crisis. And that's enabling us to deliver faster to customers. And last, I would like to mention that we have been quite innovative to reply to specific customer requests in the crisis context. There were specific requests which were emerging from this crisis. We were able to develop specific models. I would just mention specific logistics hybrid models, for instance, or we also developed a lot more direct to patients solutions. all that was already our DNA, but somehow this period has forced us to increase these good practices. And now we are doing everything to keep that as, let's say, a new way of working, or I would say a new way to manage customer experience.
If we now turn our thoughts to thinking ahead and think about the challenges, having seen how the governments across Europe and across the world have reacted so far, what would be the kinds of support, if any, would you expect from your government there in France?
I would say the main support that companies expect is a financial support, of course, to SMEs and to large companies to go through this crisis. And I think most of the governments are handling that in a positive way. There are multiple forms of support, specific support on taxes in several countries, as you have seen. There is also state guaranteed loans and many other things. All that is very positive, of course, and it's really necessary. But the main way to go through such a crisis is a question to be able to face the crisis as a company and to be able to have the strong capacity to react fast to this crisis. That being said, we have seen that with a pretty general lockdown situation in most of the countries, also there was, how to say, a very positive impact on everything around the climate and the environment. So I would add to that somehow we are now expecting from government to help and to support this initiative on making sure that we work better on mitigating the environment impact and improving our environment impact.
Do you think there will be a change on some of the indicators of success, which could now be providing fragile growth, being ahead of the competition, or even a laissez-faire type question, the way in which we've been managing our supply chain? How do you see this?
Yeah, the indicator of success, of course, for this year will definitely not be the growth, as you can imagine. But I think that in future, one of the main indicators of performance will be your resilience. And resilience is a combination of multiple factors. It's about your business continuity plan's robustness. It's about the way you manage the crisis. It's about the continuity of your operations, etc., etc. But I would like to see emerging among that new indicators, and I will mention two ones that I would really enjoy to see emerging in this new period, this new normal, as you call it. The first one will be an indicator on the way to manage human capital, because this is essential. So it's about loyalty of employees, it's about happiness of employees. And the second indicator that I would like to see emerging is about the way your business is contributing to a better environment, or at least the way your business is going to mitigate its environment impact. So that's the type of new indicator that I would like to see in the future in this new normal environment that we are talking about. Now, about the question on, as you mentioned, on the supply chain model that we have developed. I think, of course, and it's a lot in the air, we are talking about more local or more regional supply chain models. And I don't know if it's realistic, but I think that we should at least ask ourselves two questions. The first one is, how can my business continuity plan, my BCP, enable to mitigate risk into my global supply chain model? That's the first question. And the second question would be, how can I balance, or even how can I offset my supply chain environment impact.
If I take your statement there of the effect on the supply chain, by shortening the supply chain is more than likely going to increase consumer costs at the end of the day, because we're going to be bringing back some of that supply chain from low-cost economies. Do you think we as consumers are going to be prepared to pay that price?
That's a very good question, and to be honest, I'm not able to have the exact answer to that. What I know is that it will be complex to question our supply chain model. And even if we are thinking about a more local or more regional model, it will be complex. So I think the question will not be, is the end consumer ready to pay twice the price because we are thinking about having more local or more regional model. I think it's about challenging the way our supply chain are organized today in order to make sure that we are able to mitigate risk and making sure that in this supply chain model that we have, we can also balance the negative effect of this global supply chain model that we have in place, such as environment effect. And balancing that or offsetting that can be, I think, an alternative to consider global supply chain that will be very hardly questionable, I think.
As a leader of people, your staff look to you for guidance. When you think about the other CEOs and senior management out there across the board in lots of different organizations, what would your advice to them be on how to manage people in such uncertain times?
I am convinced that, if we want to somehow reach new level of performance, we have to focus on what I would summarize 3 main aspects. The first one, which is for me the most important one, will be the way we manage people. How can I put human capital in the center of my business model? So I think it's a virtuous approach which will facilitate and generate as well high virtuous key success factors, such as, for example, I mentioned collective intelligence. I mentioned shared leadership, but it can be also superior agility and positive reaction to change. So I think this first pillar about making human capital the center of my model is really essential. The second aspect, I think, is really to focus and to work very hard on every resilience factors. How can I make sure that my business can demonstrate a strong resilience for the short term, the mid-term, and the long term? And the last aspect that I would advise to emphasize would be to step by step transform our business like we did in my company in a highly agile model, which has the capacity to react fast and to change, to face to the change and to face to new situation. So last point is really being more agile and transforming our model step by step into very agile organizations.
Thank you, Cédric, for your answers today. I'm sure that our viewers on LinkedIn will really appreciate the time that you spent with us, and hopefully they will benefit from your knowledge and your wisdom. Is there anything that you'd just like to say closing this interview, Cédric?
Yes, I would like to add something important for us. CRYOPDP has been in the heart of this crisis. It was for us the opportunity to demonstrate again what is really the true sense of our mission: to serve the clinical trial research community and work on improving health globally. So thank you again, and I wish you and the BioHire team a great success.